December 19, 1944, Camp Livingston, Louisiana. The transport truck delivered 23 German prisoners through gates that closed with surprising gentleness. Klaus Zimmermann, still wearing the torn Luftwaffe uniform he'd been captured in 4 days earlier near Bastogne, expected guard towers bristling with hostility. Instead, he found bored American soldiers smoking cigarettes, their rifles held with the casual indifference of men whose war had already been won. The interrogation room smelled of coffee and bureaucracy. A lieutenant with mediocre German asked Klaus his specialty. "Flugzeugmechaniker," Klaus answered, "aircraft mechanic." The lieutenant wrote something in English. Klaus noticed the man's fountain pen leaked slightly, creating small blue wounds on the page. The imprecision bothered him more than the questioning. The barracks held 40 men in various stages of adjustment. Some maintained rigid military bearing, others had already adopted the loose posture of defeated soldiers grateful to be alive. In the corner, a broad-shouldered man with a knight's cross sewn inside his collar was gathering listeners. Klaus recognized the type immediately, the true believer who would fight the war forever in his mind. "Zimmermann," the man said that evening, approaching Klaus's bunk. "I'm Otto Becker, Panzer Corps. You look like someone who understands what we're building here." Klaus understood perfectly. He'd seen it in every Wehrmacht unit. The men who confused loyalty with fanaticism, who believed surrender meant betrayal rather than survival. "I understand I'm tired," Klaus said, turning toward the wall. The work assignments began within a week. Klaus found himself on a farm 12 miles from camp, repairing equipment alongside 2 other prisoners and 3 American mechanics who regarded them with wary curiosity. The farm's tractor, a John Deere Model B, had defeated everyone for 3 days. The American foreman gestured at it with frustration. "Damned thing won't hold compression." Klaus approached the tractor as he'd approached the 1,000 aircraft engines, systematically, eliminating variables. He removed the cylinder head, examined the valves, checked tolerances with his fingertips since no proper measuring tools were available. The valve seats were cut incorrectly, perhaps 0.2 millimeters off specification. He borrowed a grinding compound, improvised the lapping tool from a wooden dowel and sandpaper, and spent 2 hours bringing the surfaces into proper alignment. When the engine fired smoothly on the first pull, the American foreman stared at Klaus with new interest. "Where'd you learn to work like that?" Klaus said nothing. Where he'd learned was the problem. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Red Cross stationery, German text written by a stranger's hand reporting official information. The house in Stuttgart destroyed in an American raid, September 1944. His mother dead, his father alive, living with an aunt in Esslingen. His younger brother Henrik stationed in Dresden as anti-aircraft crew. Status unknown. Klaus knew what status unknown meant by February 1945. He'd heard what happened to Dresden. Somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 dead in a firestorm that turned a city into a crematorium. Henrik would have been at his gun until the fire took him, because Henrik never quit anything. Not piano practice, or mathematics problems, or the war he'd never believed in. That night, Klaus dreamed of repair work. In the dream, he was trying to fix Henrik, looking for the mechanical failure, the component that could be replaced. But Henrik's body was made of Dresden's ash, and every time Klaus tried to adjust something, pieces crumbled away until nothing remained but the measuring tools in Klaus's hands, still precise, still German, still useful for nothing that mattered. Otto found him the next morning. "We're organizing," Otto said quietly. "Germans who remember what Germany means."
Klaus looked at Otto's certainty, his unshattered belief that nationality explained anything. "Germany," Klaus said slowly, "put my brother in Dresden and then burned him alive. Tell me what that means." Otto's face hardened. Some men, Klaus realized, needed enemies more than they needed truth. May 14, 1945. The news reached Camp Livingston on a Tuesday, transmitted through radio static and tentative translation. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The announcement created strange weather in the barracks. Some prisoners wept. Others sat silent, processing the end of something that had structured their entire adult lives. Otto Becker's group gathered in tight formation, maintaining military bearing as though posture could prevent dissolution. Klaus felt only the particular numbness of inevitability. Germany had been losing since Stalingrad. The end merely took longer than mathematics predicted. The camp administrators understood that victory created new problems. Thousands of German prisoners now required disposition. Repatriation to a destroyed Germany appealed to no one, least of all to Americans who discovered that trained German labor was remarkably useful. The pragmatic solution emerged through bureaucratic channels. Certain prisoners, properly vetted and sponsored, might remain in America under supervised employment. Frank Sullivan arrived on June 3, 1945, representing Ford Motor Company's post-war expansion initiative. He was 42 years old, walked with a slight limp from Iwo Jima, and possessed the particular American genius for seeing opportunity in chaos. His proposal to camp administrators was straightforward: identify skilled German mechanics, sponsor them through the clemency program, put them to work in Detroit's automotive plants. The interviews occurred in the camp's administrative building. Frank reviewed files, conducted brief conversations, and made quick assessments. Most prisoners offered adequate skills. Klaus Zimmermann offered something else entirely. "Your file says you repaired that farmer's tractor," Frank said in competent German. "How'd you diagnose the problem?" Klaus described the process: systematic elimination, tolerance checking, precision surface finishing. Frank listened, then pushed a blank sheet of paper across the desk. "Draw me a Messerschmitt 109 engine valve assembly, from memory." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Klaus hesitated, recognizing the test. Then he drew. His hand moved with the muscle memory of 1,000 maintenance procedures: the valve stem, the keeper grooves, the spring assembly, the combustion chamber interface. He added dimensions from memory, tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters. Frank studied the drawing. Klaus had rendered it in perfect orthographic projection. 3 views with proper proportions, the kind of technical illustration that required years of training to produce without reference. "That's Luftwaffe Technical Academy training," Frank said quietly. Klaus met his eyes. "Yes." "You understand what I'm offering?" Frank leaned forward. "Sponsorship means I'm responsible for you. You work for Ford exclusively. You live where I arrange. You report regularly. You essentially trade one supervisor for another." "Why?" Klaus asked. "Why would you want me?" Frank's smile contained no warmth, only calculation. "Because automotive manufacturing is about to become warfare by other means. The Soviets are building capacity. We need to build faster and better. Your precision training, your systematic approach, that's worth something. Worth enough that I'm willing to take a risk on a former enemy." The honesty was almost refreshing. Klaus was being offered not redemption, but utility. He would be valuable, not forgiven. "My father is in Germany, alive. I want to bring him here eventually." "Prove yourself first," Frank said. "Show me you're worth the investment, and we'll discuss it." That evening, Otto cornered Klaus near the mess hall. You're taking Sullivan's offer." "Yes," Klaus said. "Traitor," Otto hissed. "You'll work for the people who burned our cities, who killed your brother." Klaus thought of Heinrich's last letter, still lost somewhere in the war's chaos. Heinrich, who'd wanted to study music, who'd never wanted to be a soldier, who died firing anti-aircraft guns at the bombers that eventually killed him. "Germany killed my brother," Klaus said slowly. "Germany put him in Dresden. I'm done serving Germany." Otto's face twisted with contempt. "You think they'll ever see you as anything but a Nazi? You think you can wash away what you are?" "I don't know," Klaus admitted, "but I know staying who I was leads nowhere." On June 27, 1945, Klaus signed the sponsorship papers. Frank Sullivan's signature appeared beside his own, and below that, an official stamp from the U.S. Army Clemency Program. The document specified terms: 5 years supervised employment, regular reporting, travel restrictions, and the possibility of deportation for any violation. Klaus studied his own signature, the German script looking foreign beside the English text. He was 23 years old, his country had lost a war, his brother had died in flames, and he'd just sold his expertise to former enemies for the price of a future he couldn't imagine. "Welcome to America," Frank said, extending his hand. Klaus shook it, feeling the transaction complete. He was no longer quite a prisoner, not yet quite free. He was something in between, a useful thing. A German mechanic in American hands, a man whose skills might build a life or merely build better machines. Time would reveal which. August 1945, Detroit, Michigan. Klaus Zimmermann experienced America first as sound, a wall of industrial noise that made the Ardennes forest artillery seem quiet by comparison. The Rouge plant sprawled across 2 square miles of Michigan geography, 100,000 workers moving through shifts that never stopped, machinery that never slept. The scale was incomprehensible. Germany had built precision. America built volume. Frank Sullivan's arrangements placed Klaus in a boarding house on Junction Avenue, a 3-story structure occupied primarily by Polish immigrants who regarded the new German tenant with cold silence. His room measured 10 feet by 12, held a narrow bed, a bureau with a cracked mirror, and a window overlooking an alley where children played games in languages Klaus was still learning to distinguish. The landlady, Mrs. Kowalski, was 60 years old and had left Warsaw in 1921. She took Klaus's first month's rent without comment, then paused at the door. "My husband died in the uprising," she said in careful English. "Warsaw, 1944. Germans killed him." She studied Klaus's face for reaction. "You will keep your room clean. You will not drink. You will not bring trouble." "Yes, ma'am." Because what else could he say? His first morning at the Rouge plant arrived with industrial dawn. Streetcars packed with workers, lunch pails and thermoses, men speaking English and Polish and Italian and languages Klaus couldn't identify. He followed the crowd through gates that swallowed them into the factory's metabolism. The maintenance supervisor, a man named Henderson, pointed Klaus toward the tool crib and the maintenance crew's break area. "Sullivan says you're some kind of miracle mechanic. We'll see. You're on probation, German. Keep your head down and don't give me problems." The assembly line stunned Klaus into silence. Automotive production in Germany had been artisanal by comparison, skilled workers assembling components with care. The Rouge plant was organized brutality. Conveyor systems, specialized stations, workers performing identical operations every 45 seconds for 8-hour shifts. It was brilliant and terrible, efficient and dehumanizing. He was assigned to the press shop, where massive stamping machines converted flat steel into body panels. The machinery broke constantly under the stress of continuous operation. He watched the other mechanics work. Quick fixes, adequate repairs, solutions that got the line running immediately. Good enough for now, fix it properly later if there's time. Everything in Klaus resisted this approach. Luftwaffe training had been absolute. Repair correctly or people die. Aircraft that are 95% fixed crash. But this wasn't aviation, and no one was dying from imperfect door panels. His first real test came on his third day. Press number 7 had a timing problem that was defeating 2 mechanics. The upper die was impacting 0.03 seconds late, creating inconsistent stampings. The mechanics had adjusted the clutch mechanism twice without solving it. Henderson was calculating downtime costs and growing angry. Klaus approached cautiously. "May I look?"
The mechanic stepped back with expressions mixing skepticism and hope. Klaus studied the press as he'd studied aircraft engines, systematically, eliminating variables. He checked the clutch, the drive shaft, the bearing assemblies. Then he noticed something. The motor mount bolts were slightly loose, allowing microscopic movement under load. 0.3 millimeters of play, perhaps. Nothing you'd catch without looking specifically for it. He borrowed a torque wrench, tightened the mounts to specification, and ran a test cycle. The press operated perfectly. 20 minutes of diagnosis, 5 minutes of repair. Henderson stared at the smooth operation, then at Klaus. "How'd you know to check that?" "The sound," Klaus said, which was partly true. The press had been making a particular vibration frequency he'd heard in aircraft engines with loose mounts, but the complete truth was that he'd been trained to suspect mounting systems, to check them first, to never assume bolts stayed tight. He didn't explain this. His precision was already visible enough. His first letter from his father arrived in September, forwarded through Red Cross channels. The German text was shaky, his father's handwriting degraded from hunger or age or despair. "Klaus, I am alive, though I do not know why. Stuttgart is ruins. I live with your aunt. We eat what we can find. There is no work, no future here. I am glad you are safe. I cannot ask you to help me when I do not know how you survive yourself. Your mother's grave is somewhere under rubble. We cannot find it. She would be glad you are alive. Heinrich's last letter arrived yesterday, dated January 1945. He wrote that he believed in you. Keep believing in yourself. Your father." Klaus read the letter 3 times, then placed it in his bureau drawer under the few clothes he owned. Heinrich's letter still existed somewhere. The thought was unbearable and necessary. That Sunday, driven by loneliness he couldn't name, Klaus walked to the Catholic church 6 blocks from his boarding house. Mass was in English, incomprehensible, but the ritual was familiar. After the service, a priest with Irish features and knowing eyes approached him. "You're new," the priest said. "Father Thomas O'Brien." "Klaus Zimmermann." "German?" Father O'Brien's expression didn't change. "Welcome. You look like someone carrying weight. My door's open if you need to talk." Klaus nodded, not trusting words, but he returned the next Sunday and the next, finding something like peace in the routine. Father O'Brien never pushed, never asked direct questions, just offered presence. At the factory, Klaus began to establish a reputation. Machines he serviced stayed fixed. Problems he diagnosed stayed solved. The other mechanics noticed, but couldn't articulate what was different. Klaus worked with a precision they recognized as foreign, but couldn't quite place. Rose Washington worked nearby on the paint line assembly. She was 32, Alabama-born, Detroit resident for 3 years. She'd watched Klaus for weeks before speaking to him during a shift break. "You're the German everyone's talking about," she said directly. Klaus looked up from the sandwich Mrs. Kowalski had made him. "Yes." "You know what's funny?" Rose continued. "They're all impressed with you who worked for Hitler. Meanwhile, I was born here, and half these folks won't eat lunch next to me because my skin's the wrong color." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. "Just something to think about while you're becoming American." Klaus had no response. The observation was precise as a micrometer measurement,
and just as uncomfortable. The weeks accumulated into months. Klaus's English improved through necessity and evening study. His reputation grew. Frank Sullivan visited twice, observing Klaus work, nodding with satisfaction at the investment proving valuable. Klaus saved nearly every dollar he earned, planning for the day he might bring his father to America. But every night, in the small room overlooking the alley, Klaus dreamed in German and woke in English, suspended between identities, precise in his work, and lost in everything else. Spring 1946. Klaus Zimmermann had been at the Rouge plant for 8 months, and his reputation had evolved from curiosity to necessity. The paint shop crisis arrived on a Tuesday morning. Line 3 had been shutting down randomly for 6 weeks, costing Ford approximately $8,000 daily in lost production. 3 mechanics had examined it. 2 engineers had analyzed it. Henderson was facing pressure from management that trickled down as barely controlled rage. Klaus approached the massive paint delivery system as he'd approached everything, systematically. The other mechanics had checked obvious failures: pumps, valves, pressure regulators. Klaus checked tolerances. He measured clearances with calipers he'd made himself, precision instruments ground to specifications that made the factory's standard tools seem crude. The problem was microscopic. A bearing assembly in the primary pump was worn 0.05 millimeters beyond specification. Not enough to cause obvious failure, but sufficient to create pressure fluctuations that cascaded through the system. Klaus replaced the bearing, measured everything twice, and brought the line back online. It ran perfectly for the first time in 2 months. Henderson stared at the smooth operation, then at Klaus. "How the hell did you even know to look there?" Klaus couldn't explain without revealing the depth of his training. Luftwaffe mechanics checked tolerance stacks obsessively because aircraft vibrations exposed any imprecision. He'd been taught to suspect bearing wear, to measure everything, to trust numbers over assumptions. "Experience," he said simply. Frank Sullivan called Klaus to his office that afternoon. The manager's expression mixed satisfaction and calculation. "You're wasted in maintenance. I'm moving you to the experimental division, advanced manufacturing processes, efficiency improvements. You'll work with engineers, not just mechanics." Klaus felt simultaneous pride and terror. More visibility meant more exposure. "I prefer the factory floor." "I'm not asking your preference," Frank said. "I'm maximizing my investment." The words stung with their honesty. Klaus was still a useful thing, not quite a person. Rose Washington found Klaus during lunch break the next day. She sat across from him without invitation, unwrapping a sandwich with deliberate slowness. "So what's your story?" she asked directly. Klaus looked up, startled. "My story? Everyone's got one. You're German, you work like a machine, you don't talk to anyone. I'm curious what makes a man that quiet." Klaus considered lying, deflecting. Instead, he chose partial truth. "I was a mechanic in the war, for the Luftwaffe. I was captured. Mr. Sullivan sponsored me." Rose nodded slowly. "And now you're here, being useful, earning your keep." She paused. "You know what I think? I think you're afraid if you stop being useful, they'll remember you're German and send you back." The observation was devastatingly accurate. Klaus had no response. "I get it," Rose continued. "I have to be twice as good to get half the credit because I'm black. You have to be 3 times as good because you're German. We're both performing for an audience that's looking for reasons to fail us." She stood, gathering her lunch. "Difference is, I was born here. This is my country denying me. You're trying to earn a country that doesn't owe you anything." She smiled without humor. "Good luck with that." Klaus watched her walk away, understanding he'd just been given a gift, perspective from someone who understood invisible weight. The experimental division began the following Monday. Smaller team, elite mechanics, engineers from Ford's Technical College. and new workers arriving weekly, including, on a cold morning in late March, a thin man with haunted eyes and numbers tattooed on his forearm. Samuel Katz.
April 1946. The experimental division occupied a separate building, insulated from the main factory's chaos. 12 mechanics, 6 engineers, quiet enough to hear individual machine sounds. Klaus had been working there 3 weeks when Samuel Katz arrived. Sam was 41 years old, weighed perhaps 130 pounds, and moved with the careful economy of someone whose body had betrayed him through starvation. The refugee sponsorship program had placed him through Jewish relief organizations. His file noted metalworking experience, mechanical aptitude, and a willingness to work any job available. Henderson introduced him to the team without ceremony. Sam Katz, metalworking specialist, someone show him the equipment. Klaus volunteered, partially from politeness, partially from recognition of a fellow displaced person. He demonstrated the machinery, explained the division's focus on manufacturing efficiency, and noted Sam's careful attention. Sam asked good questions in accented English, revealing genuine technical knowledge. They worked in proximity for 2 weeks before Klaus noticed Sam's attention had become observation. Sam watched Klaus's hands, his tool selection, his methodical inspection sequences. The scrutiny felt different from normal workplace curiosity, more focused, almost investigative. Klaus tried to dismiss it. Then he caught Sam staring at how Klaus held a micrometer, the specific 3-point grip taught in German technical academies. Klaus adjusted his grip immediately, but too late. Sam had seen. The tension accumulated silently. Sam said nothing, but his observation intensified. He positioned himself where he could watch Klaus work. He took note of his systematic approach, his precision measurements, his refusal to accept approximate solutions. Klaus began avoiding Sam, making excuses to work in different areas, but the experimental division was too small for successful hiding. 3 weeks after Sam's arrival, Klaus stayed late finishing a calibration project. Most workers had departed. The building was nearly empty, filled with the ambient hum of ventilation and distant machinery. Sam appeared at Klaus's workbench. His face was unreadable, his voice carefully controlled. "Where did you learn to work like that?" Klaus's hands stopped moving. He understood immediately what Sam was asking. Not about general mechanical training, but about the specific techniques, the precise methods, the systematic approach that carried unmistakable fingerprints. "I don't understand," Klaus tried, knowing it was futile. "The 3-point micrometer grip, the clockwise inspection sequence, the tolerance verification at 0.05 millimeter intervals. These aren't American methods. They're German military technical academy methods. I know because the SS mechanics at Auschwitz worked exactly like you do." The words hit Klaus like physical blows. The machinery of death camps, maintained with the same precision he'd used on aircraft engines. The same training, the same systematic approach applied to murder instead of aviation. Klaus set down his tools with shaking hands. He could lie. He could deflect. He could claim coincidence. Instead, he chose truth. "I was Luftwaffe, aircraft mechanic. I was conscripted at 19, trained in precision maintenance, and captured during the Battle of the Bulge. I never fired a weapon, I only fixed airplanes." He met Sam's eyes. "But yes, that's where I learned." Sam's face twisted with emotions Klaus couldn't parse. "Do you know what they did? The Germans?" "I know Germany lost. I know cities were destroyed. I know millions died. 6 million Jews, systematically murdered, in camps built with German precision, operated with German efficiency, maintained by mechanics who learned the same methods you're using right now to fix Ford's machines." The silence stretched between them, filled with history too vast for any response. My entire family, Sam continued. Parents, wife, 2 daughters, brothers, sisters, all dead in Auschwitz. I survived by working in the metalworking shop, making parts for the machinery that
killed my family. And now I'm in America, trying to build a new life, and I find myself working next to someone who... He stopped, unable to finish. I didn't know, Klaus whispered. Not the scope, not the camps. I was just trying to survive, to keep aircraft flying, to serve your country, Sam finished bitterly. Yes, everyone was just serving their country, just following orders, just doing their job. Klaus had no defense, because there was no defense. His individual innocence meant nothing against collective guilt. His non-combat service was irrelevant measured against industrial genocide. What do you want me to do? Klaus asked finally. Sam looked at him with exhausted rage. I don't know. I thought I wanted you gone, but Father O'Brien says... He stopped, realizing he'd revealed consultation. I don't know what I want, except for my family to be alive, which you can't give me. They stood in the silent factory, 2 men separated by unbridgeable history, and Klaus understood his American life had just become infinitely more complicated. May 1946. Sam Katz filed a formal complaint requesting Klaus's removal from the experimental division. Frank Sullivan, informed only of personality conflicts and irreconcilable differences, refused. Klaus was too valuable. Sam would need to adjust. This forced them into cold coexistence. They worked in the same space, used the same equipment, and spoke only when professionally necessary. Other workers sensed the tension without understanding its source. Henderson warned them both that personal problems needed to stay personal. Klaus sought Father O'Brien's counsel, meeting at the church on a Wednesday evening when the building was empty except for votive candles and lingering incense. He knows what I was, Klaus said quietly. He knows my training, and he's right to hate me for it. Father O'Brien listened without immediate response. A technique Klaus had learned meant the priest was weighing words carefully. Sam came to me too, Father O'Brien said finally. He told me what happened to him, what the Germans did. I didn't know, Klaus said. Not the camps, not the scale of it. Does not knowing absolve you? The question was pastoral, not accusatory, but it cut deep. No, Klaus admitted. My country did it. I served that country. I don't know how to separate those things. Father O'Brien leaned forward. Sam must decide if he can work beside you. That's his burden. Your burden is different. You must learn what Germany did, not to torture yourself, but to understand what you're part of. Ignorance isn't innocence, Klaus. It's just ignorance. Klaus began reading everything he could find about the concentration camps. The Detroit Public Library had reports, newspaper accounts, photographs that made him physically ill. Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. Industrial murder, systematic elimination, bodies processed with the same efficiency Germany brought to everything. He read until he understood that Sam's family had been murdered while Klaus was adjusting carburetor mixtures on fighter planes, that German precision had served evil while Klaus had told himself he was just a mechanic, just doing his job, just trying to survive. The knowledge didn't absolve him, nothing could, but it ended his ability to hide behind not knowing. Meanwhile, Sam sought his own counsel. Rabbi Goldstein, a survivor who'd established a small congregation in Detroit, listened to Sam's fury and his confusion. Can I work beside him? Should I? The Talmud says, the righteous of all nations have a place in the world to come. It doesn't say all Germans are guilty forever. It says, judge individuals by their actions. His actions served evil, Sam protested. His actions fixed aircraft. Evil used those actions, but did he commit evil himself? Sam had no answer that satisfied him. Rose Washington, observing both men's isolation, intervened with characteristic directness. She found them both during lunch, sitting at opposite ends of the cafeteria. She sat between them, forcing proximity. "Whatever's between you two is poisoning the whole division," she said. "Either resolve it or quit, but stop making everyone else walk on eggshells." Klaus started to apologize. Sam started to explain. Rose held up her hand. "I don't care about the details. I care that two grown men are acting like children. You," she pointed at Klaus, "are running from something, and you," pointing at Sam, "are so busy being angry you can't see anything else." Her analysis was reductive and entirely accurate. The tentative thaw came unexpectedly. A machine malfunctioned during a test run, a pneumatic press that lost pressure catastrophically. Sam was closest when a hose ruptured, spraying hydraulic fluid at dangerous pressure. Klaus moved without thinking, hitting the emergency shutoff and pulling Sam clear before the fluid could blind him. The rescue took perhaps 3 seconds. Both men stood in the sudden silence, covered in hydraulic oil, and Sam said quietly, "Thank you." "Of course," Klaus replied. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply two men recognizing each other's humanity in a moment of crisis. Small, inadequate, and somehow essential. That evening, Sam left a book on Klaus's workbench, Jewish Mourning Customs. A note in Sam's careful handwriting, different traditions, same loss. Klaus opened it, reading about practices for honoring the dead, and understood the gift Sam was offering, acknowledgement that Klaus's grief for Heinrich was real, even if their losses weren't equivalent. He found Sam before leaving the factory. "Would you be willing to talk? Actually talk?" Sam hesitated, then nodded. "Sunday, Father O'Brien's church, neutral ground." Klaus agreed, understanding they were attempting something neither knew how to accomplish, building a bridge across history's deepest divide. June 1947. The letter arrived in a Red Cross envelope, forwarded through 3 displaced persons agencies before finding Klaus in Detroit. His name written in Heinrich's familiar handwriting, dated January 28, 1945, 2 weeks before Dresden burned. Klaus held the envelope for an hour before opening it. When he finally read, Heinrich's voice returned from the dead. "Klaus, I'm scared. Not of dying. I think I've accepted that's probably coming. I'm scared I'll die without telling you that you were the best brother anyone could have had. You taught me to fix things, to see how pieces fit together, to appreciate precision. You tried to protect me even when there was no protection left. If I don't survive this, and you do, because you're smart enough and lucky enough, please don't carry guilt. Live twice, once for yourself and once for me. Build something, fix things. Make the world work better than we found it. That's how you honor the dead, not by joining them in misery. I believe in you. Heinrich." Klaus read it 3 times, then collapsed. The grief he'd been containing for 2 years broke through every defense he'd constructed. Mrs. Kowalski, hearing sounds of distress, found him on the floor of his room, clutching the letter, sobbing with the particular violence of delayed mourning. She called Margaret Sullivan, whose visiting nurse experience had given Mrs. Kowalski's number for emergencies. Margaret arrived within 30 minutes, found Klaus still on the floor, and simply sat beside him without speaking. She stayed for 4 hours, bearing witness to grief that needed no words. When Klaus could finally speak, he read her the letter. Margaret listened and said quietly, "He loved you very much, and he was right. You need to live for both of you now." Father O'Brien, summoned by Margaret, arrived that evening. Klaus showed him the letter, and the priest read it with the careful attention he gave to sacred texts. "This is grace," Father O'Brien said finally. "Your brother is releasing you from guilt. He's giving you permission to build a life." "I don't deserve permission," Klaus whispered. "None of us deserve grace. That's what makes it grace." Klaus took 3 days off work, the first time he'd requested leave. During those days, Sam learned about the letter through workplace conversation. He wrestled with his response, finally consulting Rabbi Goldstein. His brother died in Dresden, Sam explained. The Allied bombing. And you lost your family in camps, the rabbi said gently. Both losses are real. Grief isn't competitive. On Sunday, Sam found Klaus at Father O'Brien's church. He sat beside Klaus in the empty sanctuary and said, "I heard about your brother's letter. I'm sorry for your loss." Klaus looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Why would you offer me sympathy?" "Because I know what it means to lose everyone," Sam said simply. "I know what it means to survive when others didn't. And I know that grief is grief, regardless of which side killed whom." They sat in silence. Then Sam said, "Would you tell me about Heinrich?" Klaus did. He described Heinrich's love of music, his gentleness, his conscription at 17, his assignment to Dresden's anti-aircraft defenses. He spoke for 30 minutes while Sam listened without interruption. When Klaus finished, Sam said, "My daughters were 8 and 11. Rachel loved mathematics. Sarah loved stories. They died in the gas chambers at Auschwitz while I was working in the metalworking shop 100 meters away." Klaus had no response adequate to such loss. "I'm sorry" seemed grotesque in its inadequacy. "Me too," Sam said. Then he added, "Your brother asked you to live twice. My daughters can't ask me anything. But I think they'd want me to live, not just survive." He looked at Klaus directly. "Maybe we help each other do that. Maybe that's how we honor all of them." Klaus nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation. It was two broken men agreeing to witness each other's brokenness, to share the impossible weight of survival, to build something from ruins. They began meeting regularly, for coffee, for conversation, for the slow work of understanding across unbridgeable differences. Klaus told Sam about German working-class life before the war. Sam told Klaus about Polish Jewish community before the destruction. They traded memories like valuable currency, creating space where both truths could exist simultaneously. Their friendship shocked everyone who knew its foundation, but Father O'Brien, watching them build something genuine from historical horror, called it what it was: the hardest kind of grace, the kind that requires both parties to change. August 1948. Klaus had been in America 3 years. His English was fluent, his reputation established, his relationship with Margaret openly acknowledged. He'd begun sponsorship proceedings for his father. Life felt possible, almost stable. Then Otto Becker walked into the German-American social club where Klaus had reluctantly attended a community gathering. Otto had aged poorly, harder edges, bitter lines around his mouth, eyes that tracked targets rather than seeing people. He worked at Chrysler now, in their manufacturing efficiency division. He'd also been sponsored, also adapted superficially, but carried resentment like fuel. "Klaus Zimmermann," Otto said warmly, extending his hand. "I heard you'd made yourself at Ford." Klaus shook his hand warily. "Otto, I'm surprised to see you." "We're Germans in America," Otto said smoothly. "We should stick together, compare notes, share expertise." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've been following your work. Very impressive. Very German." Klaus felt warning bells. "I work for Ford, just maintenance and efficiency improvements." "Of course," Otto agreed, "but your methods, they're quite specific. Precision calibration, systematic diagnostics, tolerance verification.
Methods taught in Luftwaffe technical academies. He paused. I recognized them because I had similar training. Panzer maintenance used comparable approaches. The war's over, Otto.
Is it? Otto leaned closer. Because I think America is fighting a new war now against the Soviets, and I think our German expertise is more valuable than anyone admits. I think we should be properly credited, perhaps properly compensated. Klaus understood immediately. Otto wanted to monetize their training, to sell German military techniques to American companies or perhaps back to German firms. I'm not interested. Otto's face hardened. Then perhaps newspapers would be interested in how Ford's manufacturing improvements come from a former enemy's military training, how a Nazi mechanic is stealing American industrial secrets. I'm not a Nazi, Klaus said firmly. You wore the uniform. You served Germany. That's enough for most Americans. Otto stood. Think carefully, Klaus. Cooperation benefits us both. Refusal benefits no one. Klaus reported the conversation to Frank Sullivan the next morning. Frank's response was pragmatic and concerning. Can he prove your methods are military-derived? Anyone with technical knowledge could recognize them, Klaus admitted. Frank nodded slowly. Then we have a problem. My sponsorship of you was politically controversial. If newspapers start calling you a Nazi infiltrator, he trailed off, calculating. I'll need to protect Ford's interests, which means protecting you, but also means limiting damage if this goes public. Klaus heard what Frank wasn't saying. Their relationship was ultimately transactional. Frank would defend Klaus as long as it served Ford's interests. Margaret, learning about Otto's threats, responded differently. Tell me everything about your past, everything. I want to stand with you, but I need to know what I'm standing beside. They sat in her apartment, and Klaus told her everything. His conscription, his training, his specific work on Messerschmitt fighters, his capture, his brother's death. He held nothing back, expecting her to retreat. Instead, she took his hand. Thank you for trusting me. Now, let's figure out how to handle this together. Sam's response was equally direct. Otto's threatening you because he knows I work with you. He's betting my presence proves you can't be that bad, which undermines his narrative, so he'll try to divide us. I won't ask you to defend me publicly. Your credibility is yours. I won't compromise it. You're not asking, Sam said firmly. I'm offering. If Otto goes public, I go public too. The Holocaust survivor who works beside the German mechanic, that's a story that complicates his simple narrative. Rose Washington, characteristically direct, pointed out the larger issue. Otto's trying to reduce you to your past. Don't let him, but also don't hide from it. If this goes public, tell your whole truth, not just the parts that sound good. Father O'Brien agreed. The truth is your only defense, not because it's pretty, but because it's real. 2 weeks later, an anonymous letter appeared in the Detroit Free Press. Nazi mechanic at Ford plant. How many enemy soldiers are being rewarded for service to Hitler? The newspaper began investigating, contacting Ford for comment, interviewing workers, building a story. Klaus faced the choice he'd been avoiding since arriving in America: hide and hope, or stand and face judgment. He chose truth. He requested a public hearing, offering to answer any questions about his past and present. Ford, calculating that transparency might serve better than secrecy, agreed. The hearing was scheduled for September 15, 1948. Klaus had 3 weeks to prepare testimony that would either vindicate or destroy him. September 15, 1948. Ford Motor Company's Administrative Building, Conference Room C, capacity 150. Every seat filled, standing room only. Reporters from 6 newspapers, representatives from veterans organizations, refugee advocacy groups, union leadership, and Ford management. Klaus Zimmermann sat at a table, facing them alone, except for Frank Sullivan beside him, and truth as his only defense.
The Ford personnel director opened proceedings. This hearing addresses concerns about the employment of former enemy combatants. Mr. Zimmermann has requested the opportunity to address these concerns publicly. Klaus stood. His prepared statement was in his pocket, but he decided during the sleepless previous night to speak without it. Reading would feel like hiding. My name is Klaus Zimmermann. I was born in Stuttgart in 1921. My father was a clockmaker and a social democrat who opposed the Nazis. I was conscripted into the Luftwaffe in 1940 at age 19. I was trained as an aircraft mechanic. I never flew combat missions. I never fired a weapon at Allied soldiers. I maintained Messerschmitt fighters, kept engines running, replaced parts, performed inspections. I was good at this work because my family taught me precision, and the Luftwaffe taught me systematic maintenance. He paused, looking at faces ranging from hostile to sympathetic. In December 1944, I was captured near Bastogne while repairing a downed aircraft. I was sent to Camp Livingston. I expected hatred. Instead, I found opportunity. Mr. Sullivan sponsored me through a clemency program. I came to Detroit in 1945. Klaus's voice strengthened. I learned in Detroit that my younger brother, Heinrich, died in the Dresden bombing. He was 17, assigned to anti-aircraft defense, and he burned to death defending a city from bombers. I also learned that while I was fixing airplanes, Germany was murdering millions in concentration camps. I didn't know the scope during the war. I know now. This knowledge doesn't absolve me of serving Germany, but ignorance wasn't innocence. It was failure to see what I should have seen. Someone in the audience began to interject. The director raised his hand for silence. The accusation is that I've used German military methods to steal American industrial secrets. This is partially true and completely false. True, my maintenance methods come from Luftwaffe training. False, I'm not stealing anything. I'm giving everything. Every technique I've learned, I've taught to other Ford mechanics. Every improvement I've made, I've documented for others to use. I'm not hoarding German knowledge. I'm making it American knowledge. Klaus pulled out a folder. These are training manuals I've written at my own expense and time, teaching precision maintenance to American workers. Free, available to anyone. This is how I earn my place here, not by hiding what I know, but by sharing it. He sat down. The room buzzed with conversation. Sam Katz stood next. His testimony was brief and devastating. My name is Samuel Katz. I survived Auschwitz. I lost my entire family in the camps. Parents, wife, 2 daughters, siblings, all murdered by Germans using the same systematic efficiency Klaus learned in the Luftwaffe. I paused, letting this sink in. When I recognized Klaus's methods, I wanted him fired. I wanted him gone. I wanted him to suffer as I'd suffered. But suffering doesn't heal suffering. Klaus didn't kill my family. Germany did. Klaus served Germany, yes. He carries that responsibility. But I've worked beside him for 2 years now. I've watched him teach young mechanics, help struggling workers, and live
with genuine remorse. If I can work beside him, knowing what I know, then you can too. Justice means seeing individuals, even when history makes that unbearably hard. Margaret Sullivan testified next, describing treating both Allied and German wounded, arguing that medicine taught her that humanity transcends nationality. Rose Washington testified about Klaus's character, then pointedly noted that Klaus was being judged more fairly than Black Americans who'd done nothing wrong. Otto Becker, called as a witness, attempted to portray Klaus as a security risk. His testimony was undermined by his obvious bitterness and by Sam's earlier statement. The Holocaust survivor's defense carried weight Otto's accusations couldn't match. Frank Sullivan's testimony surprised Klaus. He described Klaus not as an asset, but as a person, acknowledged his own initial opportunism, and stated plainly, "I sponsored Klaus because he was useful. I defend him now because he's earned it." The hearing concluded after 4 hours. Ford's decision, delivered a week later, was to retain Klaus with conditions. He would conduct educational outreach, continue sharing his knowledge freely, and participate in programs promoting reconciliation. Klaus had been publicly judged and publicly vindicated, but the victory felt hollow. He'd been forced to defend his humanity, to prove he deserved space in a country that remained uncertain whether former enemies could become citizens. Yet something had shifted. His truth was now public. The hiding was over.
October 1952, 4 years after the hearing. Klaus Zimmermann stood in a federal courthouse in Detroit, right hand raised, repeating words that transformed legal status into belonging. "I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance to any foreign state, and that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States." Samuel Katz stood as his witness, a symbolic choice that surprised no one who knew their history. When the judge handed Klaus his naturalization certificate, Sam embraced him while flashbulbs popped for the local newspaper's human interest story. From enemies to brothers, Holocaust survivor witnesses German mechanic's citizenship. The intervening years had been transformative. Klaus's father had arrived in 1949, a broken man, slowly rebuilding himself through clockwork repair and proximity to his surviving son. Klaus and Margaret had married in a small ceremony at Father O'Brien's church in 1950, a union that still raised eyebrows in some circles, but had weathered public scrutiny. Klaus's teaching had expanded. He trained over 50 mechanics in precision methods, essentially creating a new generation blending German engineering discipline with American innovation. His students included young Black mechanics recommended by Rose, Jewish refugees connected through Sam, and working-class whites from Detroit's neighborhoods. The training was free, thorough, and transformative. Otto Becker had been deported in 1949 after attempting to sell Ford proprietary information to German companies. His arrest had required Klaus's testimony, a painful necessity that represented Klaus's final choice of American law over German loyalty. The Rouge plant had become Klaus's genuine home. He'd risen to senior supervisor in the experimental division, managing teams that developed efficiency improvements now spreading throughout American automotive manufacturing. His German precision had become simply the Zimmermann method, nationality absorbed into technique. But the true measure of Klaus's integration wasn't professional success. It was the friendship network he'd built. Sam and his new wife, Rose and her union organizing work, Father O'Brien's continued spiritual guidance, Margaret's partnership. These relationships built across historical chasms represented something more valuable than success. They represented genuine belonging. The citizenship ceremony concluded with Klaus delivering a brief speech, a requirement he'd initially dreaded but now embraced. He spoke about Heinrich, about living twice,
about earning rather than deserving his place in America. He acknowledged his past without hiding from it, his present without taking it for granted, and his future as a responsibility rather than a right. My brother asked me to build something, to fix things, to make the world work better than we found it. I've tried to do this through teaching, through sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it, through building bridges instead of walls. This is how I honor Heinrich. This is how I earn America. Not through forgetting where I came from, but through being honest about it while building something new. After the ceremony, the small gathering, Sam, Margaret, Rose, Father O'Brien, Frank Sullivan, Klaus's father, and several former students, celebrated at a modest restaurant. The conversation mixed languages and traditions, German and English and Yiddish, Catholic and Jewish customs, black and white perspectives, creating something distinctly American from diverse elements. Klaus's father, elderly now but restored to something like peace, raised a toast in German, to those who didn't survive and to living well enough to honor them. They drank to memory and future simultaneously. The following Monday, Klaus returned to the factory floor for a special training session. 2 young mechanics awaited him. Marcus, a black veteran Rose had recommended, and David, a Jewish refugee Sam had connected to the program. Klaus taught them as he'd been taught, precisely, systematically, thoroughly. He showed them how to measure tolerances, how to diagnose by sound and touch, how to approach machinery with both respect and confidence. Heinrich's letter, now framed, hung on Klaus's office wall above his workbench. Live twice, once for yourself and once for me. Build something. Klaus had built a life, a family, a legacy. He'd transformed German precision from a weapon of war into a tool of peace. His Luftwaffe training into American manufacturing excellence. He'd proven that redemption was possible not through dramatic gestures, but through consistent daily choices to teach, to share, to build rather than destroy.
As Klaus watched his students learn, he understood Heinrich's final gift. His brother hadn't asked Klaus to forget Germany or to stop being German. He'd asked Klaus to live fully, to use what he'd learned in service of creation rather than destruction, to honor the dead through building the world they'd never see. Klaus had done this, not perfectly, never without cost, always carrying the weight of history. But he'd done it. He'd earned his place not through denying his past, but through honest acknowledgement, followed by purposeful action. The precision that had once maintained warplanes now trained the mechanics who'd build America's industrial future. The systematic approach that had served evil now served peace. And Klaus Zimmermann, former enemy, current citizen, had become simply an American who happened to have been German, teaching the next generation that belonging is earned through contribution, that redemption is practiced daily, and that even terrible histories can produce unexpected bridges between people willing to build them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.